Picture this. It's 2026, and across the dusty borders of West Africa, military trucks rumble into position. Not as peacekeepers, not as liberators, but as a warning, a stark, unmistakable message that says, your days of independent decision-making are over. But what happened next wasn't surrender. It was defiance. And what started as a regional standoff has become the most consequential geopolitical shift in Africa that Western media simply refuses to acknowledge. This is the story of how a nation facing military intimidation from a neighboring country didn't flinch. Instead, it dug in, armed up, and told the world something that challenges everything you thought you knew about African politics, Western influence, and the future of an entire continent. Let's start with the tension. In the early months of 2024, Chad, a nation to the west of Burkina Faso, began moving military units toward the border. Not quietly, not subtly. These weren't routine exercises or standard deployments. Intelligence reports and regional analysts began flagging something unprecedented. A military buildup that looked less like a show of force and more like a staged confrontation. The message seemed clear to anyone paying attention. Burkina Faso's government under Ibrahim Traoré needed to fall in line. The question was, fall in line with whom and toward what? To understand what was really happening, you have to understand the man who currently runs Burkina Faso. Ibrahim Traoré rose to power in 2022 through a military coup, and from the moment he took control, he began making decisions that infuriated the Western establishment. He rejected French military bases on Burkinabe soil. He kicked out Western-aligned intelligence agencies. He began openly courting Russian military advisors and security partnerships. Most importantly, he started talking openly, unapologetically, about Burkina Faso's right to control its own resources, its own destiny, and its own security apparatus without answering to Paris, Washington, or Brussels. For decades, this kind of talk would have been unthinkable in West Africa. The colonial echoes were too loud, the economic dependencies too deep. But Traoré said it anyway, and people listened. Here's where things get interesting, because Chad's military movements weren't happening in a vacuum. They were part of a larger pattern, a coordinated message being sent to three nations in the Sahel, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, all of which had begun moving in the same direction, toward independence from Western control, toward resource sovereignty, toward partnerships with Russia and other non-Western actors. The intimidation was designed to break that momentum, to send a message to the region that this new path would come with consequences. But Chad's leadership, analysts quickly realized, wasn't acting independently either. The coordination with other pressures on the region suggested something more orchestrated. The timing was too perfect, the build-up too deliberate. This wasn't Chad suddenly deciding it had a border dispute with Burkina Faso. This was a proxy play, a way to apply pressure on Traoré without direct Western intervention. And it almost worked. Almost. Because what Traoré did next changed the entire calculus. Instead of negotiating, instead of backing down, instead of making the kinds of concessions that previous African leaders would have made when faced with military intimidation, he did something that shocked observers across the continent. He mobilized. Rapidly. Completely. He issued orders for rapid troop deployments to every border facing Chad. He reinforced defensive positions. He distributed modern weapons throughout the military command structure. And then, critically, he did something that hadn't been done openly like this in the Sahel in generations. He spoke directly to his people and the world. In a powerful public statement, Traoré declared something that sounds simple on the surface, but carries immense weight in the context of African politics. Burkina Faso would never surrender its sovereignty, never bow to foreign-backed intimidation, never sacrifice its independence for the sake of appeasing external powers. The statement wasn't theatrical. It wasn't filled with revolutionary rhetoric divorced from reality. It was clear, direct, and backed by action. The weapons being distributed? Modern systems. Not decades-old Soviet-era equipment that was supposed to be Burkina Faso's standard arsenal. These were current-generation weapons, suggesting that the military partnerships Traore had forged with Russia and other non-Western powers weren't just diplomatic gestures. They were substantive, real, and capable of shifting the military balance in the region. And here's what mainstream media missed while covering the story, if they covered it at all. This wasn't just about Chad and Burkina Faso. This wasn't a regional border dispute that could be resolved through mediation and handshakes. This was the physical manifestation of a civilizational choice being made. Three nations in the Sahel were simultaneously saying no to the Western-dominated international order, no to colonial-era economic dependencies, no to the idea that African nations should accept Western military domination in the name of stability, no to the notion that natural resource extraction should benefit Western corporations first and African citizens second. Mali had already traveled down this path. After a military coup in 2020, Mali's government began systematically dismantling French military presence and deepening ties with Russia, not as a radical experiment, but as a calculated assertion of sovereignty. The economic model shifted. Defense contracts that once went to French companies began flowing toward Russian firms. Uranium that was once controlled by French interests began being negotiated for different terms. Oil revenues that were supposed to flow into Western-aligned development funds started being redirected toward Mali's own economic priorities. Niger followed a similar trajectory. After its own military coup in 2023, Niger's government expelled French military forces, terminated defense agreements that had governed the country for decades, and began the process of renegotiating its entire relationship with the West. The optics were dramatic. Soldiers occupying the French military headquarters, French flags being taken down, but the substance was more profound. A nation was reclaiming control of its defense policy, its resource extraction, and its foreign policy orientation. And then came Burkina Faso, moving in the same direction, but under more direct and immediate pressure. The Chad military buildup was designed to stop this momentum, to show that defiance would come with a price, to demonstrate to other African nations that stepping out of line meant military consequences. But Traoré's response revealed something crucial about the new balance of power emerging in Africa. He had alternatives. Russia had provided him with modern weapon systems. Russia had provided him with security partnerships. Russia had provided him with a diplomatic cover to make independent decisions without facing the automatic economic and political isolation that would have confronted an African leader making these same choices 30 years ago. When Chad's military moved toward the border, it wasn't the automatic intimidation tool it would have been in an earlier era, because Burkina Faso could now mobilize in response, could arm its forces with weapons that didn't come from the Western supply chain, could make clear that an invasion or military pressure wouldn't result in capitulation, could rely on diplomatic support from powers beyond the Western sphere. And that shift, subtle but profound, represents a fundamental restructuring of geopolitical power in Africa. The escalation that followed was intense, though largely unreported in Western media. Traoré's government began mobilizing reserves. Border garrisons were reinforced with elite units. The distribution of modern weapons continued, sending a clear signal to the military high command that their leader was serious about defending national sovereignty. In the streets of Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso's capital, there were demonstrations of support. Not manufactured rallies orchestrated by a dictatorial government, but genuine popular mobilization around the core message. Our nation's independence matters more than external pressure. Here's what Western analysts often miss when they evaluate situations like this. They apply a framework based on weak states and strong external powers. They assume that African nations, lacking the economic and military weight of Western powers, should be rational actors who accept subordination as the price of stability. But this framework breaks down when you introduce genuine alternatives to Western partnership. When an African nation can source weapons elsewhere, can find markets for its resources beyond Western companies, can access investment capital without Western conditions attached, the entire power dynamic shifts. Russia's involvement in the Sahel isn't, as Western commentary often frames it, about Russia extending its influence into Africa. It's more accurately understood as Russia providing tools that allow African nations to exercise agency, to make independent choices, to resist what they increasingly view as neo-colonial relationships disguised as development partnerships. The Burkina Faso case study is particularly telling because it shows this dynamic unfolding in real time. Traore inherited a country facing genuine security challenges. Militant groups with connections to both ISIS and Al-Qaeda were conducting operations across the country. The previous government had relied on French military support to counter these groups. That support had been inconsistent, often prioritizing French strategic interests over Burkinabe security concerns. So when Traoré took power, he inherited both the security challenges and the opportunity to reorient the nation's defense relationships. The Russian partnership offered something different: equipment transfers that Burkina Faso could control, security advisors who answered to Burkinabe commanders, and a military-to-military relationship not encumbered by the colonial history and ongoing economic dependencies that defined the Franco-Burkinabe dynamic. Whether this choice ultimately proves superior strategically, economically, militarily, remains to be seen. But the point is that it was a genuine choice, made by an African government exercising its sovereign right to select its own partners. What happened with Chad's military movements ultimately illustrates this choice in stark relief. The intimidation didn't work. Traoré didn't capitulate. The border tension eventually de-escalated, but not because Burkina Faso backed down. It de-escalated because the pressure campaign hadn't achieved its objective. The calculation had been miscalculated. The assumption that military pressure would force a policy reversal collided with the reality that Burkina Faso now possessed both the capability and the political will to resist. But the broader geopolitical story, the one that should be commanding global attention, is what this confrontation reveals about the future of Africa and the future of Western influence on the continent. For the better part of a century, Western powers maintained dominance in Africa through a combination of military superiority, control of capital flows, and the absence of credible alternatives. When a nation wanted to pursue policies independent of Western preferences, it faced isolation, economic sanctions, and sometimes military intervention. The emergence of alternatives, primarily Russian, but also including China, Iran, and others, has fundamentally altered this calculus. An African nation can now look at the Western partnership and say, "We're not satisfied with these terms." And instead of facing automatic isolation, it can turn to these alternative partners. This doesn't mean those alternatives are necessarily better. Russian weapons systems have their own limitations. Russian economic partnerships come with their own strings attached. But the existence of alternatives means that Western dominance is no longer absolute. The Sahel nations, Mali, Niger, and now Burkina Faso, are betting on this shift. They're making the strategic calculation that a partnership with Russia, despite its limitations, offers them more genuine sovereignty than continuing within the Western-dominated order. Whether that bet proves correct, whether Russian partnerships ultimately serve their national interests better than Western ones, is a different question. But the fact that they're making this choice at all, and that they're willing to defend that choice when challenged, signals something irreversible. The resource dimension of this story is equally important, though often overlooked. The Sahel is extraordinarily wealthy in natural resources. Mali has gold reserves that rank among the world's largest. Niger has uranium deposits that power nuclear reactors across Europe and North America. Burkina Faso has untapped mineral wealth and agricultural potential. For decades, much of the extraction and profit from these resources flowed toward Western companies and Western nations. Local populations saw limited benefit. Government revenues were often insufficient to build the kind of infrastructure and security apparatus that development requires. The new orientation toward non-Western partnerships is, in many ways, about renegotiating the terms of resource extraction and benefit distribution. If Burkina Faso's gold goes to Russian companies instead of Western ones, or if the revenue terms are more favorable, that's material for governance and security. It changes the resource equation. It allows governments to invest in their militaries, their infrastructure, their populations in ways that the previous arrangement didn't permit. From the perspective of Sahel leaders, this isn't ideological opposition to the West. It's rational economic self-interest combined with an assertion of political sovereignty. The West had its chance to create partnerships that genuinely served the interests of these nations. Instead, it created arrangements that served Western interests while offering limited benefits to local populations. Now, when alternatives exist, those populations are voting with their feet, or more accurately, their governments are making rational choices based on what benefits them most. The Chad military movements and Traoré's response, in this context, should be understood as a crucial turning point. It demonstrated that the new Sahel nations won't accept external pressure to abandon their chosen path. It proved that the balance of power has shifted enough that intimidation no longer works automatically. And it signaled to other African nations that asserting independence from Western dominance is possible. Not easy, not without risk, but possible. What's striking is how little international attention this generated. A military confrontation between African nations, escalating security pressures, the distribution of advanced weapons, public declarations of sovereignty against foreign pressure. In any other context, this would be front-page news globally. But because it doesn't fit the narrative that Western media prefers to tell about Africa, a narrative of weak states dependent on external actors, the story remains largely untold. Yet the implications are substantial. If the Sahel nations successfully consolidate their new partnerships and security arrangements, it creates a model for other African countries. Why accept Western dominance if independence is available? Why tolerate the economic terms that Western partnerships impose if alternatives exist? The demonstration effect could be enormous. Nigeria, Cameroon, Côte d'Ivoire, larger, more economically significant nations, might look at Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso and begin questioning their own Western alignments. This doesn't necessarily mean wholesale abandonment of Western partnerships, but it does mean renegotiation. It means African nations asserting themselves as equals in these relationships, not subordinates accepting Western preferences as inevitable. It means the comfortable era of Western dominance in Africa, an era that lasted from the end of formal colonialism through most of the Cold War and persisted through the unipolarity of the post-Cold War period, is ending. The irony is that this shift was partly accelerated by Western overreach. The push for military interventions in Libya, the undermining of elected governments when they didn't align with Western preferences, the conditionality attached to economic aid, the control of currency systems and financial flows. All of these created resentment. All of them convinced African leaders that Western partnerships, despite their apparent stability, were fundamentally fragile because they rested on subordination rather than genuine mutual interest. When Russia offered an alternative, one that didn't come encumbered with centuries of colonial baggage, one that seemed to respect sovereignty more explicitly, one that offered economic and military partnerships without the same level of political conditionality, it became attractive. Not because Russia is better or more altruistic, but because it offered something different, a relationship that looked more like partnership between equals. Traoré's rapid mobilization in response to Chad's military movements should be read as a statement about this new reality. He was saying, "We have the capacity to defend ourselves. We have partners who will provide us with the tools we need. We will not be intimidated. Your pressure campaign will not work because we're no longer isolated. We're no longer dependent on you alone." The weapons distributed to Burkinabe military units, modern, capable, sufficient to deter direct military action, were the physical manifestation of that message. Every soldier receiving those weapons understood the broader message. Our government has broken free from the constraints that limited previous governments. We can access equipment elsewhere. We don't have to accept humiliation. That's not revolutionary rhetoric. That's not anti-Western ideology. That's the practical assertion of sovereignty by a government that believed it had no choice but to assert it. The military pressure from Chad was meant to suppress this assertion. It failed because the assertion was already backed by real capability. As you watch what unfolds in the Sahel over the coming years, remember this moment. Remember that when a landlocked nation in West Africa faced military intimidation, it didn't surrender. It mobilized. It armed. It declared its commitment to independence. And it backed that declaration with capability. Whether the choices it made prove wise remains to be seen. Whether Russian partnerships ultimately serve Burkina Faso better than Western ones is still an open question. But what's certain is that the era of automatic Western dominance in Africa is ending. Nations are making choices. Some will choose Western partnerships on new, more balanced terms. Some will choose Russian or Chinese partnerships. Most will probably pursue some combination, playing different partners against each other to maximize their own sovereignty and benefit. The confrontation between Chad and Burkina Faso, largely unreported and certainly underappreciated, is the sound of that transition. The sound of an old order crumbling and a new one being built. The sound of Africa reasserting itself. And the question facing the West now is whether it can adapt to this new reality or whether it will continue applying the old frameworks to a fundamentally changed landscape. One thing seems certain: the nations of the Sahel will continue making their own choices. And when pressured to abandon those choices, they'll have the means to resist. That's the real story. That's what actually matters. And that's what explains why a military standoff in the Sahel might end up being one of the most consequential geopolitical developments of our time.